Hello, hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Whether you're watching this live on Zoom or Facebook, or whether you're watching recording later on YouTube, we are so happy to have you. Welcome to another edition of WIF's Laptop Cinema Club, where we talk to the filmmakers and industry changers behind the media we love and the media impacting the world around us. I'm Ebony Adams, Manager of Public Programs for WIF, and I'm really honored to bring you this conversation tonight. It's been months in the making. Along those lines, before I introduce our panels tonight, I'd like to take a moment to thank Erica Howard and Frontline for helping us make this event happen. They have been absolutely extraordinary partners, and we love to support the work they're doing to uplift female filmmakers. And now I'd like to introduce you to our special guest. Please welcome the director and executive producer of the powerhouse documentary, 1,000 Cuts, Ramona Diaz and Raney Aronson-Rath. With press freedom under threat in the Philippines, 1,000 Cuts goes inside the escalating war between the government and the press. The documentary follows Maria Ressa, a renowned journalist who has become a top target of President Duterte's crackdown on the news media. The film has been called utterly urgent by the Washington Post and hailed as essential and as immersive political documentary by the Hollywood Reporter. Director Ramona Diaz is an award-winning Asian American filmmaker whose films have screened at Sundance, Berlin, Tribeca, South by Southwest, IDFA, Hot Docs, and many other top-tier film festivals. Her first film, Imelda, about the former Philippine First Lady Imelda Marcos, premiered and won an award at Sundance and screened worldwide. Her most recent film, Motherland, also won an award at Sundance in 2017 and had its international premiere at the Berlin International Film Festival. It was nominated for Independent Spirit Award for Best Documentary and a Peabody Award. Ramona is both a Guggenheim Fellow and a USA Fellow, prestigious awards given to artists with singular visions who have significantly contributed to the arts in this country. She was just named a 2021 Film Fellow by the American Academy in Rome and will be spending her summer there. Raney Aronson-Rath is the executive producer of Frontline, PBS's flagship investigative journalism series, and a leading voice on the future of journalism. She oversees Frontline's acclaimed reporting on air and online and directs the series' editorial vision, executive producing over 20 documentaries each year on critical issues facing the country and world. Under her leadership, Frontline has earned 2 Oscar nominations and has won every major award in broadcast journalism, including Peabody Awards, Emmy Awards, an institutional Peabody Award, and the first Alfred DuPont Columbia Gold Baton awarded in a decade. Joining us to moderate this evening's conversation is Karen McMullen, who's the director of programming for the Tide Film Festival, features programmer at Tribeca Film Festival and Doc NYC, and screens for the Sundance Film Festival. She served as a juror for the Pan-African and Benjaminville Film Festivals and has sat on the review committees for the Carey Institute, Black Public Media, and Cinema Eye Awards. She's moderated panels for us and also for the New York African Film Festival, NIWIFT, and HBO, and appears on television and radio as a media expert. She has editing credits on numerous features, documentaries, and short films. She's also an associate professor teaching post-production at Long Island University. We do want to let you know that Ramona and Raney will be taking your questions, so please feel free to type them in the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or just type them into the chat on Facebook. Please also note that closed captions are available tonight, so just tap that button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and they should appear automatically. And now I'm going to turn it over to Karen, Ramona, and Raney. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ebony, and welcome to the discussion of 1,000 Cuts. Ramona, thank you, and Raney, thank you for that dynamic and timely, thought-provoking film. Can you talk to us about just the genesis of 1,000 Cuts and what drew you to the story?
I was born and raised in the Philippines. So, and I came here for college. I became an adult in this country, but I was born and raised there. And in 2016, I was finishing actually Motherland, and Duterte became president, right, in the Philippines. I grew up under martial law, under the Marcos dictatorship, and seeing Duterte rise to power was very troubling for me because it seemed like it was regressive. It had taken us years to build democratic institutions in the country, and suddenly Duterte was president. So that's what drew me back. And and of course the drug war, because he became very notorious for the drug war. Right after he became president, he campaigned on the drug war and made it come true shortly thereafter. There were bodies in the streets. So that's what drew me back. I thought I wanted to make a film about the drug war, but when I got to the Philippines, a lot of people wanted to make the film about the drug war, and there were it's breaking news, and I can't really, as an independent filmmaker, I don't know how to do breaking news. Like, I don't have the capacity or I just didn't know how to do it. And it was also, so I looked around in the Philippines. I said, there's a story here, you know it, right? You can sniff it out. And I looked around, and there was Maria Ressa, not only talking about the drug war, not only calling out Duterte, but she was also talking about disinformation and the weaponization of social media. So that all, the intersectionality of that. So to me, that was interesting because I'd never thought about that. It was all new. And to me, if it's new to me, if it surprises me, I feel like it'll surprise an audience, right? I'm my first audience usually. So that she became, I was really drawn to her, and she was speaking out. And she, as you know, she's really articulate about what is going on in the Philippines. So that's how it started. And I met with her and asked if I could film her. It's not that easy, but it is a process of access.
Easier said than done, right?
Yes.
And Raney, how did you come on to this project?
Well, I wanted to say, listening to Ramona, I love every time you tell that story, you add in a few more details, which I just absolutely love. And I was thinking something that you talk a lot about is the patience that you had, right? And the serendipity, of course, of when you were there and what happened then to Maria Ressa. So on this particular film, I should say there are two sort of heroines for me, and one is Ramona and one is Maria Ressa. So I'm an investigative journalist by training, but I run Frontline, so we make documentaries, and I'm a filmmaker too. And it was actually around the same time I became really aware of Ramona's work and Maria Ressa's work. And I was realizing, Ramona, the other day, that synergy was something that had happened to me years earlier when I saw Motherland. And literally, I was thinking to myself, because I'd just taken over Frontline, this is the kind of film I want in Frontline. But it was a little out of reach because Ramona's a big independent filmmaker and she's out in the world. And I was thinking like, okay, someday we'll work with Ramona. Maria Ressa comes into the story because we were starting to report on disinformation and the impact of Facebook on disinformation, and also having real life impact in places like the Philippines and Myanmar and other places like that. And Maria Ressa was able to explain to me and to our audiences for the very first time the ecosystem that we now understand very well. But this is years ago, and she was revelatory for me. And like Ramona said, when I was learning it, I didn't quite understand the gravity of it, but Maria can tell it in a way where, first of all, you believe her. Second of all, she gives you real examples. She's a great journalist and storyteller. And so that combination was sort of a dream for me. And then, I wasn't at Sundance that year, but a lot of people were watching 1,000 Cuts at Sundance as it premiered. And I literally got like 12 to 13, 14 text messages like, you have to see this film. You have to see it. You're going to die when you see this film. It's amazing. So it was sent to me. And then I essentially pitched to Ramona and Julie Goldman and, Jonathan at Concordia Studios, like Frontline should be the home for this and why. And I was very passionate. And, of course, we put our money on the table too. We're willing to say, hey, this is a priority for us. And so we came to the table after Sundance, and I'm so thrilled we did.
Yeah, I mean, us too. So nobody in the Philippines would broadcast it, right? No one was going to show this film, and Frontline stepped in to do so, right?
Yes, Frontline stepped in, I was so happy because no one would pick it up. And to me, it's really important that they see it. We did show it actually for 24 hours for free earlier on. Like Maria got her first verdict on June 15th, 2020. And that was like the height of the pandemic. I mean, the dark days, right? It's mid-year 2020. And I felt like no one was paying attention to the verdict. And it's really key in the Philippines because it really hinges press freedom and everything else, cyber libel. I'm like, no one's paying attention. Everyone's also in lockdown. So, oh my gosh, all the stakeholders agree that we should screen it in the Philippines for free for 24 hours. So that's what we did, Friday night to Saturday. And then we landed on a live talk just like this. I think it was the very first one we did with Maria, actually. And I remember, I think Erica at Frontline said, don't expect much because we really did it so quickly. We decided so quickly and everyone signed off. And I'm thankful that Concordia and Frontline, this was before we even distributed it anywhere. It wasn't released yet. And piracy was an issue, right? But they said yes, because they knew it was important to do it in the Philippines. And they warned me, with there's not much notice. We just sent it out in our, social media really very quickly. They said, Frontline gets an average like of 40,000, but man, this one maybe 5. I'm like, wow, that's 5,000 more people than would have, I'm like, I'm happy with 5,000. In 24 hours, it got like 233,000 full views in the Philippines. It was incredible. It just hit. It was this
wildfire.
Right, guys. It went viral in those 24. So that was the very first time. And of course, yes, we had to deal with piracy. And by the time Frontline actually released it like a few months ago, I just felt like, in the Philippines, you shouldn't have to watch a pirated copy. You have, you should watch a real like an official copy. So I'm so glad Frontline really stepped in because no one else would pick it up. So it was their first time, right, or something.
Right. So one of the interesting things about this whole process has been, the environment that we're publishing into now, like the international distribution market is really changing, right? And so if you think about it, like all the platforms, they're trying to sell into these countries. So it's why countries like Saudi Arabia, something like The Dissident, it's hard to get these films out into the world. And this is about Duterte, right? So the international folks who actually had, and they're super talented, they had the rights to this film, were doing their best to get it distributed in the Philippines. And Ramona was telling me, and she was really agonizing over this. And then it was just one night when I just was like, oh, why don't we distribute it there? I mean, why wouldn't we? Because we have a YouTube channel, and the 24 hours, to be clear, that we released it earlier was on YouTube. Yeah. So we actually can create our own channel in 2021. See, that is just revelatory if you think about it, right? And we just concocted that together because I was like, hey, why don't we just put it on YouTube? And that moment forward meant that the Filipino people could see her film. And it was really, really deeply important, and is probably a model for us going forward, is that when films do get blocked in the international distribution market, Frontline can come in with our YouTube channel and get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of views. I mean, it's amazing.
It is amazing. And if disinformation can spread virally, so can solid, informative art. So what was the reaction? People saw it. Was there a backlash? What did Duterte have to say about it?
Well, it's still on. It's still, people can still see it in the Philippines. I don't think, oh my God, once I say this, I don't think it's in his interest to block it, right? Just like I don't think, oh my gosh, knock on wood. I don't think Maria's out on bail. She can't travel, but I think the international attention really helps secure her, not freedom, but I don't think they'll. Again, I'm not going to say it because it jinxes it. But I think international attention, Maria, is good, and I don't think they'll. I think if they stop it, then there's more attention on. So some things they're smart about, right? Some things.
Right. We haven't seen YouTube blocked in countries other than like officially blocked in countries like North Korea. There are countries that we know as publishers, like things won't be seen, but we haven't seen that yet in the Philippines. But yet, if you talk to the international distributor, none of the actual broadcasters were willing to broadcast it, because the fear there is real. It a lot of times was unspoken. But people, Ramona told me, and so did the international distributor, people were not even calling back. And Ramona is one of the most prominent, if not the most prominent person in the Philippines. So it's been quite interesting how much things have changed, right? In just a matter of, 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the safety. This is a largely woman film crew and team have done a magnificent job, I will underscore. But throughout the film, Maria is in peril. She's in physical danger for her life, and you must have also been. Can you talk about how you navigated safety while shooting?
Yeah, my main concern was my local crew, right? Because I have a ticket out of the Philippines. So did my cinematographer and my sound person who flew in with me. We could leave. We were going to leave after we wrapped. But so it was my local crew I was very concerned about. And when it was apparent that Maria was now the center of the film, or a major participant in the film, I had a talk with my local crew. I said, you can leave the project and I would never think badly of you. You can, because I understand you have to live here and there are consequences. Not one of them left the project. And so what I did was we were all housed together. I housed everyone in one place. So I felt like for as long as I could control their safety, I would do it, like during the filming of it. And it's a personal choice, right? I mean, every day we just have to think, every day, can we work today? Are we going to work today? Is it safe? It seems safe. And and also we took courage from Maria, who was like, no, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. We weren't really afraid of what the state would do, but what the crazy people would do. As you saw in the film, it's like the people who think they're acting on behalf of Duterte. That was scarier. And it's every day you just have to think, it's like one foot in front of the other, right? Can we work today? Will we work today? Yes, let's go. And also the president knew I was making the film because we had to get permission from him to film his rallies. I mean, his people, his chief of staff, because we needed to be closer to the pit rather than in the media box. And they gave us permission. So I think the fact that they knew we were making the film gave them some kind of power as well. They knew where we were. And that also was a kind of security, I think, for us, for the crew.
Karen, just to say, journalist safety is such a serious issue. Filmmaker safety internationally and domestically. I mean, something that Ramona, and as she told me these stories, the sort of choices a filmmaker like Ramona has to make is actually quite a grave one. Are you going to put on a bulletproof vest? Is it too hot, in the situation as she would describe? Does that make you completely known as like, hey, here I am? What are you going to do in these situations, in those scenarios? When we're onboarding a film in the beginning, we spend a lot of time talking about safety. We talk about digital safety. That's something the other really big concern for people like Maria and Ramona, myself, and many other women, all of us, in fact, is how is your digital security too? So if you're going to be a public person, how do you protect yourself? And this runs the gamut from, basically all women in public. So that's something that we spent a lot of time thinking about at Frontline as well.
Mm-hmm. And we couldn't work with a bulletproof vest. It's just too heavy and hot. Right. And we're running around, right? And so it was just impossible. We tried it, then we're like, we can't do it. And then, of course, then if you get security, you have more security than Maria does. That doesn't work because you're in like such intimate spaces. You can't have security. It's just me sometimes and my DP, and we were in cars. We were in her apartment, or even in public, right? It's just you form the small private spaces. It wasn't good for the film. And if it's not good for the film, I'm not going to have it.
Well, I applaud your courage, especially dealing with this, the epitome of toxic masculinity, who's bragging, who's saying just because you're a journalist doesn't mean you can't get dead too. It's crazy. Well, we have a question from the audience. Tamala asks, did you have to deal with similar government or social pressure with your film Imelda?
Oh my gosh, that's a long time ago. We also had a hard time screening that in the Philippines. It screened, but it was never broadcast ever, because this was before, I guess it was before YouTube channels. Yes, I make films that are neither Imelda was not a film about her sins, right? It was not a laundry list of Imelda's sins, because I didn't want it to be. I felt like that had been done already. And I felt like she's still alive. I want to hear her version of the story through her words, because usually these stories are told posthumously. So I felt like for as long as I have access to her and she's still alive and she can tell me the story, whether she's a reliable narrator, that's up to you, right? So I did get pushback, but from that, it was an interesting time. She also sued us in the Philippines, which is a whole other story. And that's how I almost met Maria Ressa 12, like many years ago. And I didn't, because anyway, that's another long story. But she did sue us in the Philippines for sullying her good name and invasion of privacy. But of course, we won. And she had a temporary restraining order in the film, but it had a theatrical release. It was the very first documentary that was theatrically released in the country. So so after the TRO was lifted, it was released theatrically.
Yeah, it's I saw Imelda. That was also excellent. You are very good at providing balanced looks at people, not just vilifying wholeheartedly one side. So, and you made a concerted effort to include the other side in this film, Mocha and Bato. So, and how did you talk about how you build trust with those type of characters and why you found it so important to include them in the film?
I'm fascinated with uh, with characters like the general and Mocha, because Mocha plays a very large role, right? She heads the social media platforms of the president, and the general was like the first implementer of the drug war. So those two key, and when I met them, there was something about them that wanted to be in front of the camera, and it when you meet them. It's just I've been doing this a long time, so I know when they want to be in front of the camera. And I think I'm very transparent. I told them this is not going to be. I'm also filming Maria. I was very open about that, and filming some opposition politicians. And I think they also understood that the reach of the film itself was beyond just the Philippines. So they were going to talk to like a larger audience, and they like that. They were also both running for office, right? And exposure is good when you're running for office. I caught them at the right time. To me, it's always a matter of catching people at the right time. I always enter people's lives when something big is about to happen, right? Like Maria, I mean, who knew that she was going to get arrested the day we started shooting, right? And arrested again. And then we were clearly in her life when that happened. But I tend to enter people's lives at watershed moments, like, running for office and stuff. So it's just, I think it's timing. It's when you ask them. And I was very transparent. They knew what I was doing. And people say yes, which is great. I'm always very grateful that they say yes. I'm also dogged. I don't leave, right? I always feel like a no is maybe a maybe, right? It's just gonna transition to a maybe and a yes. So I just stick around, and I tell them that they don't have to give me everything at first, right? To just try it out. It's always trial. We'll stick around. We'll film you. Let's try it out. See how you feel.
You wear them down.
I hope not. Yeah, sort of. No, but I have the luxury of, and I think that's really important. You can't parachute in, for making films like these. You really have to stay. Presence is so key, because things can change, and they have to feel that you're there, that you're not coming in for a few days and leaving. Right, they feel like that you are there, and they can presence is key.
Got it. So Raney, back to, you started to talk a little bit before about disinformation, and this film is clearly about Maria and journalism, but there's a lot about social media here, and how it aids in the spreading of disinformation. What role do you think Silicon Valley plays in their responsibility in this dissemination of outright lies?
A
Do
lot.
you have a responsibility? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it has been shocking to see how slow they've been to respond. I include Facebook in that, and we've done a lot of investigative work on Facebook in particular. Our work is really clear-eyed. I'll say something about Ramona that we love as well, is that she's also curious about the so-called other side. Like, she's curious to have that dynamic of the reality of what life is, right? And so I just wanted to comment on that because, not all films are, and filmmakers are not always so curious. And so the way that she talked about Mocha and the way that those scenes emerge are not like just papered in. Those are real curiosities that she has to understand this part of the conversation and the drive in the Philippines, right? That's then driving misinformation and the social media campaigns that you saw emerge. So Silicon Valley, we are always investigating them. And I think the one thing about Facebook, and I'll just focus on them for a minute, because not all platforms are the same. I would say that that's one thing that we learned very early with Maria, is how Facebook in particular has been really at the forefront of this disinformation campaigns across the world. And they should have gotten much more involved sooner. And the people that they have involved with mitigation and trying to, so-called police this, have oftentimes been pretty junior, and they really have over the last year or two tried to then come in and stem the tide. But frankly, it was almost too late. I mean, we've seen what has happened, right? We've seen what's happened to also this unmitigated experience we're all having now with social media. And I think, Twitter's made some good moves lately, but I think Twitter also is on the hook for, holding itself to account for the environment that they've created. So we're going to be tough on them and clear-eyed, and also, like Ramona does, give them a voice too, show what they're trying to do, but be on the case around this, because I think it's the biggest thing that's changed, certainly journalism, but every single person's life has changed because of this. Our children's lives, right? Everyone has inherited this now. So
yeah, I think what's really interesting about Maria is that she was the victim of it. So she can talk about it from a very personal point of view, and also as a journalist, right? So she can actually step back and still be the observer, but yet it happened to her. And I think what she does really well is she unpacks it. She doesn't talk about disinformation itself. She doesn't talk about content. She talks about the networks that enable it. Because she says, if you only go after content, it's a whack-a-mole game, right? It'll never, right? It doesn't help. So if you look at it in terms of the networks of lies and who's spreading it, that, then you can start trying to solve it.
And she's pretty involved in trying to solve it. And when we would lean in with her on that and say, like, what are you doing? It's just so complex to actually solve this. So can anything be done is really the next question. And a lot of the trolling that we've seen happen to her happened to multiple other women too that we know. And that's something where, when it gets personal, that can be dangerous. And that's where, with Maria, we had multiple conversations about her own safety around that, right? You can remember those. And to this day, she'll share things with us that are happening.
Yeah. And, watching the film, we no longer have the luxury of saying, oh, wow, tisk, look over there, how they're doing it, because the same thing is happening, to us. What do you think? What do you hope audiences take away from 1,000 Cuts?
Gosh, as a filmmaker, I wanna, my goal really always is to give the audience an experience, right? An experience of what it's like to be Maria, an experience of what it's like to be a victim of disinformation and the state, and just to understand how those systems work. I'm not very prescriptive when it comes to messages, because I think messages are, it's all very personal, it's context, it's where you're coming from. But for me, if you can relate to something in the film, and if it sticks in your head, so the next time you hear about this information, you sort of understand it and you know where you say, oh yeah, like in that film, like Maria, right? Then to me, I would have done my job. right? But also, obviously, we've had a lot of conversation around the film and what to do about disinformation, right? Because it is really a problem. So the fact that the film is being used to talk about all those all disinformation and the weaponization of social media is it's so amazing. It's great. But always as a filmmaker, I just want to tell the story. And then, but it so happens that when it comes out, it's used for social impact. To me, it's fabulous, obviously.
We have a lot of filmmakers watching, and they're asking questions about the craft and the making and how we're getting these stories out in the world. One of the questions from Tony Marie is, can you talk about a moment where something didn't go as planned and you had to make a pivot in regards to the film?
Oh my God, every day. I mean, as a documentary filmmaker, you're always faced with choices. It always seems to be like a fork in the road, right? Should we go left? Should we go right? And sometimes I go right and I'm like, oh, we should have gone left. But because we're following a lot of people. But of course, you know, we had, I think, 2-3 units at some point, and one unit was just with Maria. But even with Maria, you have to make a choice, right? So every day is a choice in documentary. It's a crazy thing we do where we really don't write anything. It's life unfolding in front of the lens, and it's pure, like you're always on your feet thinking, okay, what makes this story great? Okay, should we go there or should we go here? And sometimes it's the wrong choice, but you forget about it quickly, right? Because if you stay in that headspace, then the next choice will be wrong too. So you just get over it very quickly because you're faced with another choice the next minute. So if I had to think about it, I try not to, because then you're in the, oh my God, what could have happened? You know, that was a great scene, but then, you know, it's not, you know, we didn't catch it. So you move on. I think it's a matter of learning how to recover and really be, I'm more zen now than I was in the beginning of my career. I really, you really have to be calm and think calmly, because everyone around you is going crazy, but you have to be like, okay, that was the wrong choice. Let's move on. That's it. I mean, yeah. So it's really staying in the moment. It is, you know, like I said, it's a easy thing to do. We documentary filmmakers, we get the story and then we craft it after, right? As opposed to fiction, you already know, but this one, you never know. You never know where it's going to end up.
That's right. And so much of it happens in the editing room, which leads into Robin's question, which was, what was the editing process like for the film? And how much did you shoot and how much did you choose to keep?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so we filmed for over a year and a half, but really intensely for 5 months before the elections. And at some point, like I said, we had a couple of units, so we shot a lot. I wish my editor were here, but she tells it in terabytes, which doesn't make sense, right? So whatever, 8 terabytes. I don't even know what that means anymore. But we shot a lot, and then it's a 90-minute film. So the post-production process was very, I think we scheduled a 10-month post-production process, but we got into Sundance. And so we got into Sundance as we were just starting to edit. So that was cut in half. So by October, we were starting to edit, we submitted to Sundance, and then we got in and we had to we had to screen in January. So really, post was cut in half. And what you do is you get more assistant editors and work really, I mean, we didn't stop until we didn't have an ending. I had to go back to the Philippines in December of 2019 to film an ending because I thought we would have time. We were waiting for some of our cases to to come to a conclusion or come to a natural stop. And I was thinking, when that happens, I'll go back and film maybe 1 or 2 of our cases, maybe 1. But then, we nothing happened. So I had to go back and say, okay, let's find an ending for this film. And we did that. I did that like a month before Sundance. And we were literally like uploading footage from the Philippines. My editor is in Austin. She was downloading it. They found a way to do it. through buckets here and there. It's possible. We don't sleep, but it's possible to finish it. And yeah, it was crazy. It was really crazy.
Lori Evans has a question for Raney. How do you find new documentaries to feature on Frontline? I guess short of having people in the Sundance audience text you. What kind of stories are you looking for, and where are you finding the filmmakers?
So we find filmmakers in a bunch of different ways. We have been going to festivals the last 3 or 4 years. So I took over Frontline 5 years ago. And the first thing I asked myself is who was not telling stories for Frontline. That was really my guiding light. And it was a lot of people. I'll just be really honest. When I took over Frontline, I really set my sights on new storytellers, and it ranges from Ramona to, Wad Al-Khatib, who did For Sama for us, which is really a beautiful film. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it. To Jackie Olive, who just made an incredible film for us this spring. And so we have found films in a multitude of different ways. And I'll just say, from a 30,000 foot view, we're looking for films that have revelations in them, that have original journalism in them. And we're really trying to take Frontline in a more cinematic direction. So that doesn't mean every single Frontline will lend itself to that. Like the film we did this week was on the healthcare divide, but we were looking at a very serious investigation into the inequities that we see in our healthcare system and describing why that was happening because of private equity that was pouring into our hospitals and disrupting the hospitals. But that one was not necessarily cinematic, but it was really important too. But our hope is to do films like Ramona's, and we can't always do a film like Ramona's, but investigative work is always the heart and soul of what we do. And we have a pipeline that goes through Firelight Media at the emerging filmmaker level. But we also are really looking for mid-level and veteran filmmakers who haven't told stories for Frontline before.
And I have to say, it was the right partnership for 1,000 Cuts. And Raney has been really supportive down to the length of the film, right? And it was 2 hours at Sundance, and we cut it down to what is it now, 98 minutes when it needed to be something else. And I'm like, Raney, I think I'm done. And she agreed. She goes, yeah, I think you're done too. And we screened it at that length. I'm like, that blew my mind. I'm like, wait, Raney Aronson said, we're done? I'm like, that was incredible. So we filmed it, we screened it at the length that it should be. And I had never had that experience before. I'm like, wow, okay, which is incredible,
Yeah, I mean, it takes calling PBS and saying this film is meant to be this length and being passionate. I can't do that every week on Frontline, but this one, the natural length of the film is the film. So we were really proud, we were able to show the theatrical version of the film. And that's the way that we're moving, to not have different versions of all these films, because it hasn't been very, it's not helpful to have 2 or 3 different versions in a streaming environment. Right? So you want one streaming big film, and you hope that's also your broadcast. So that's the way that we're going now. In the past, it was always like, oh, that's the Frontline broadcast, and then there might be a theatrical. But now we're trying to collide those 2 things together.
Yeah, which is amazing. I'm still, when I think about it, I'm still like, oh my God, we did that.
We did that. Yeah, we did that.
Yeah.
Well, that's very beautiful that you have found such a collaborative partner who respects your work and can show your work at the length that it's supposed to be. Moira Turner was asking about the challenges of being a documentary filmmaker, Ramona, and she asked for you to talk a little bit about making a career as a documentary filmmaker. She said it sometimes seems impossible to sustain a career doing this kind of work, especially over multiple projects. Do you have any advice?
Yeah, it is. But I, in the beginning of my career, I taught as well, right? And that supplemented my career. I also did a lot of, I did a lot of commissioned work. I did a lot of branded content. You have to do those other kinds of work in order to sustain the passion projects. And I've been very lucky. I also got into a documentary when there were very few of us, right, making documentaries then. It seemed like there are more now. So, and funding was, I don't know, it seemed easier before. Maybe I'm romanticizing that too. I don't know, but it just seemed like the funds were bigger, so you had to go to less people to make up the budget. Now there are a lot of smaller funds, so it seems like you're constantly writing grants to make up for the big, to make the big budget. But yeah, I did a lot of other stuff in order to do the projects I love, right? But it is tough.
Yep. Yeah, people don't go into documentary filmmaking to get rich. But,
no, yeah. And it's addicting too,
mm-hmm.
It is. I always say, oh, this is my last doc, and it never is.
Well, will your next one will be about the Philippines as well?
Yes, but I can't really talk about it much because.
Okay, secret projects. I like it. I like it.
I typically don't talk about the projects I'm doing because I like working under the radar, I think it's just easier to do the work.
All right. We'll wait for it, and we know it'll be good. Your all of them are so good. Let's see. Makiko asks, regarding what's going on in the Philippines, are there specific actions people, especially in the U.S., can take to continue to support Maria and the freedom of journalists in the Philippines? It's a great question.
In terms of Maria and Rappler is digital news. What is it? Yeah, all digital news platform that she founded. They have a crowdfunding campaign that's constantly going. So if you just Google Rappler crowdfunding, it'll show up. So that's a real way to help her, but also just to keep talking about her situation. Their situation now it's very dire in the Philippines. It's almost like India in terms of like COVID. Duterte took a very militaristic stance, a response to COVID, and not a public health response. So he basically treated COVID like he treated the drug war. And generals were in charge of the response to COVID, instead of like scientists and medical workers. So you can imagine. So right now it's a surge. There's no vaccination rollout. It's really quite a mess. And Maria is out on bail, but she is not. She has a travel ban. She's not allowed to travel, so she's in the country. So it's a dire situation right now. We don't know what's going to happen in terms of COVID, and the vaccinate. There's I think a vaccination plan, but there are not enough vaccinations. Like like the same in the global South, right? It seems to be here. The vaccinations are all in like Walmart and CVS and whatever, right? In this country, but there's nothing in the global South. You really see the inequity in this world when it comes to vaccinations right now. So so she has a crowdfunding campaign for Rappler. They're an independent media. They always need help. And so if you Google it, that's a real way to help Rappler.
To add to what Maria said, something that I was really, really moved by is a conversation we have with Maria and the younger journalists who work at Rappler. And people ask, like, what can we do to help you? And what the young journalist said is share our stories with the world. Actually go on Rappler, read us, first of all, understand what we're going through, and then take our stories and share them because, we don't oftentimes do that. We might share a New York Times story, but what about the Rapplers of the world, right? What about these young, amazing, dedicated journalists who are actually, they're the ones who are risking their lives hour after hour. You see it in the film, day after day, and they're doing it with so much dedication. And I was just so moved by that, that act that we can do as individuals. We can help them too.
Mm-hmm. Can you, both of you, give us any advice on how to be better digital citizens and how to be more responsible consumers of social media?
Oh my goodness. You know, I got off Facebook. I got off Facebook and I thought it was going to be so hard to get off Facebook, and and it wasn't. I don't even miss it. I'm still on Twitter but to me it's really, don't share everything unless you read it first and know who the source is from, right? Be skeptical, right? Question, like always. Question the source, you know, don't just immediately share before reading anything. And to me, gosh, I love not being on Facebook too much. I'm not on it at all now. I mean, just because my account's still there, but I took it off all my devices, so you're not checking constantly. And I found, wow, I don't even miss it. It was easier than I thought. But of course, you miss, there are things you miss. You do miss the birthdays and all the life events. That I miss, but I like being off of it. It's nice to take a break from social media, I think.
Absolutely. We can live without cat videos is what we
Right? Yeah.
I think one thing about disinformation is to read to the end of an article. This is actually one of the smartest things a professor of disinformation said. Before you share, read it to the end. Not like the first third, which is what I typically do, but I don't share anymore. I actually like really read to the end, and I rarely share media that I don't know really is true. The other thing is be careful about your own digital media. So we were talking earlier about your own digital safety. Just be sure that you know how much about you is out there. And that's something that you might want to pull back. You know, I found myself really pulling back my output on my children, my life, where I live, you know, just becoming a little more cognizant of the era in which we're actually living, unfortunately, and being responsible for yourself. And this is just, I say this not to scare anyone, but it's just to be cognizant that this is the era that we're in now.
Mm-hmm.
I have a daughter. She's in her early 20s, and everything she does, she goes, "Mom, there's an embargo on my life. Okay, you can't share my life," which I really respect. And I've never, sometimes I do, and I tell her, but as a general, she goes, "My life is embargoed. It cannot be shared," which is great. I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. I respect that a lot. So.
Yeah, and I love that Ebony just shared one of the ways that you can actually see what your digital footprint is. And, you know, we also have a way to erase your digital footprint. If you see that you're just in so many places you don't want to be, you can actually take control of your own privacy. And my kids said the same thing. You know, these are my story. You know, I was so struck by that when my son said, "This is my story. I'm going to tell my own story." And I thought, well, of course you will. Yeah. Fine. Mm-hmm. You know, sometimes I'll share a picture. It's hard not
to. Let's see. There's a question for Anshao from Anshao, who is a little frustrated with the ending of the story. She says, "How do we go from the conclusion?" Okay. Like basically, how did you end the story when you know there's going to be more? How do we keep up and find out what the end or the resolution of the story is going to be? And how do you end a documentary when you know that we don't know what's going to happen with Maria?
Well, we had to end it at some point, right? Because if you can't follow legal cases, those take forever, right? You can't expect them to. I had hoped one of them would come to a conclusion. Just 10 of them would come to a conclusion before Sundance. But actually, the last thing you see when she was found guilty of cyber libel, that happened post Sundance, and we just included it at the end. But I know as a filmmaker that I cannot wait for cases to conclude. Otherwise, you'll never end. You'll wait forever. And I like having containers, framing devices to a film. So the framing device of this film was the elections, right? Although it's not a campaign film, it's not about really the elections, it's about press freedom. But having that sort of narrative container gives it a beginning, middle, and end, sort of. And then you can play around with time and stuff in the middle. But I like knowing when I'm going to end a film. I don't think I don't have not the patience, but I like production schedules that I can see. Okay, at this point, it's going to stop. We're going to wrap, and then we're going to go into post. So, so narrative devices, framing devices, to me are really important.
I think you can feel that in Ramona's work and other really terrific filmmakers' work, is that you really get a sense of story, and you get a sense that it's not going to go on forever. And something that we talked about that Frontline will do is, we'll have a big film like 1,000 Cuts, but on the digital side, we definitely will write stories about what's happening, so there's a written component to the journalism that's more iterative, but the film itself is a film of its time. And we hope, and I think, Ramona, definitely all of her films are like this, they will last forever. That's the other thing about when you do have a framing device that has an authenticity to it and a true beginning, middle, and end, you feel like that could be seen in 10 years and it will still feel like a story. You'll feel like you're being told something that wasn't, news. It wasn't current affairs.
Yeah, it's always a challenge to make it both timely and timeless, right? Like Raney was saying, you want it to mean something in 10 years, right? So the themes will always be evergreen, right? Speaking truth to power, the David and Goliath story, those are archetypes and evergreen stories. And so my films usually deal with evergreen themes, so they last, so they're timeless, but they're also timely. They're rooted in what's happening, because I feel like as a filmmaker, I have to engage in the moment, right? And what's happening around you. You have to comment on that and make films about that. I feel very strongly.
Yeah. And the issue is continuing. It's not, we're still dealing. It remains to be seen what happens with Duterte and
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Life continues after the last frame in documentaries.
Exactly. Well, thank you both so much for such a wonderful Q&A, and even more for that really important and wonderful movie. We can't wait to see what you come up with next, Ramona and Raney. Thank you for bringing us such dynamic work for the world to see. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks also for this wonderful conversation.
And thanks to the audience for the great questions. Really appreciate it.
This was fascinating. Thank you so much, Ramona. I know it's a lot to ask a filmmaker to also be like just an incredible conversationalist, but you're so incisive and so wonderful to listen to. This was fantastic. And Raney, I can't imagine how wonderful it must have been to have you as an executive producer for a project like this one. You just, what a team, what a team. We want to make sure those know that you can watch the film 1,000 Cuts for free. Or you can also watch it on the Frontline YouTube channel. Please, when the Washington Post said, this is an utterly urgent film, this is an essential film, a documentary for you to watch, they're not kidding. We really encourage all of you to check out this film. And we also to the open call for the Firelight Media Documentary Lab. If you're interested in being a documentary filmmaker, you think maybe one day you'd like to have a film up on Frontline, this is perfect for emerging filmmakers. So please check out that link as well for Firelight Media. And finally, yes, digital security, you can take steps to protect yourself and to be more well-informed. So we posted a link there to that as well, but we'll share those in the show notes when we post the recording for this. Thank you again all so much. This was wonderful. Raney, Ramona, best of luck in everything you have coming up. Karen, thank you for being such a wonderful moderator for this conversation. It really is wonderful to have someone who's got such a strong history in film and in documentary, being able to guide the discussion. So thank you for being here for that. Thank you to the audience, and we will see you at the next Laptop Cinema Club. Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.